The kitchen timer was counting down to something far more significant than the soufflé in the oven. Through the serving hatch, I could hear my husband's voice carrying across the dining room, that particular tone he used when he wanted to impress his university friends. "Oh, Isabella. She's just the help, really. Keeps the house running while I focus on important matters." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't flinch. My hands remained steady as I arranged the appetizers on crystal plates, plates that had belonged to my grandmother. The irony was delicious, almost as much as the meal I was preparing for the 7 men currently mansplaining venture capital in what they thought was someone else's dining room. But here's the thing about serving food to people who don't see you: they forget you have ears. They forget you're human. And they certainly never imagine you're taking notes. "Seriously though, Damien," said one of his friends. I recognized the voice as belonging to Trevor Hastings, hedge fund manager. "How did you land this place? The penthouse in Silverton Tower? Even with your consultant's salary, this is what, 8 million? "Investment timing," my husband said smoothly, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Bought in early, got lucky with some tech stocks. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I knew because every single dollar that purchased this penthouse had come from the trust fund I'd carefully hidden from him. The trust fund attached to the name I'd stopped using 5 years ago when I married him. My maiden name, Silverton. As in Silverton Holdings. As in the company that built this tower. As in the empire my grandfather founded, my father expanded, and I currently controlled through a web of shell companies and proxies so complex that even my own husband had no idea he was living in a building I owned. "Isabella." Damien's voice called out, sharp with impatience. "We're ready for the first course." "Coming, sir," I replied, my voice perfectly modulated into that soft, subservient tone I'd perfected over the past 3 years. 3 years of planning. 3 years of watching. 3 years of letting him think he'd married a simple girl from nowhere, someone grateful to be rescued from her ordinary life. I pushed through the swinging door with a tray of seared scallops, my eyes downcast, my posture slightly hunched, the universal body language of someone who doesn't want to be noticed. The 7 men barely glanced at me as I placed the plates before them with practiced precision. "And the quarterly reports show we're projected to exceed expectations by 30%, Damien was saying, gesturing with the wine glass I'd filled for him. My strategic restructuring of the Palmer account alone saved them 4.2 million. The Palmer account. The one I'd actually restructured through my position on their board, feeding Damien the strategy through a series of carefully planted suggestions that he'd immediately claimed as his own brilliant insight. "That's impressive, Damien," said another voice, Richard Blackwell, the one who'd made his fortune in real estate development. "You always had a head for business. Remember at Cambridge how you used to arbitrage the college vending machines?" Laughter erupted around the table. I retreated to the kitchen, my face a mask of pleasant neutrality, even as my mind catalogued every word, every gesture, every admission. The kitchen was my command center, though none of them knew it. While they saw a well-appointed cook space, I saw the nerve center of my operation. The tablet tucked inside the cookbook holder showed me real-time feeds from the 6 cameras I'd installed throughout the penthouse. The wine I was serving them was expensive, deliberately so, loosening tongues and lowering guards. And the soufflé in the oven? That was just for show. The real dish I was preparing would take much longer to serve. "Isabella." Damien called again, his voice carrying that edge of annoyance he'd developed over the past year. "The wine is getting low." I emerged with another bottle, a 2005 Chateau Margaux worth $3,000, and made my rounds. As I poured for Trevor Hastings, he didn't even acknowledge my presence, too engrossed in his story about shorting a tech startup into bankruptcy. The CEO actually cried during the final board meeting, Trevor said, laughing. Can you imagine? Grown man, sobbing because he couldn't save his company. That's business, Damien replied, raising his glass. Survival of the fittest. Some people just aren't built for success. I thought about the tech startup they were discussing. I thought about the anonymous investor who'd bought up their debt at the last minute, restructured their financing, and helped them pivot into profitability. I thought about the board position I held under my proxy name, and the satisfaction I'd felt watching them thrive despite Trevor's best efforts to destroy them. Your wife keeps a lovely home, said Marcus Wellington, the youngest of the group, finally acknowledging my existence as I refilled his glass. You're very fortunate, Damien. Oh, Isabella's not my wife, Damien said, and my hands stilled for just a fraction of a second. Well, legally she is, I suppose. But let's be honest, she's more of a... He paused, searching for the word. A domestic arrangement. Keeps everything running smoothly while I focus on building wealth. The other men laughed, though Marcus looked slightly uncomfortable. I noted that. Filed it away. Perhaps not everyone at this table was completely irredeemable. Come now, Damien, Richard said, though his tone was amused rather than reproachful. Surely you're being harsh. She seems perfectly pleasant. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Pleasant, yes. Useful, absolutely. Damien took a long drink of wine. But let's not pretend this is some grand love story. I needed someone to manage the household, attend the charity functions, smile at the right people. She needed financial security. It's a transaction, gentlemen. A very successful one. I returned to the kitchen, my face still perfectly neutral, my movements unhurried. Once through the door, I pulled out my phone, not the cheap model Damien had seen me use, but the secure device I kept hidden in a false panel behind the spice rack. 3 messages waited from my executive assistant, Philippa. She was one of only 4 people in the world who knew that Isabella Silverton still existed, still controlled the family empire, still pulled strings that moved markets. Philippa, documentation from the Hastings audit is complete. His offshore accounts are very interesting. Philippa, Blackwell's recent zoning permits were obtained through bribes. We have recordings. Philippa, the timeline is ready when you are. Just say the word. I typed back a single message, 2 more weeks. Let them get comfortable. The main course was a beef Wellington, ironic, given Richard's last name, though none of them would ever make that connection. As I plated the dishes, I could hear them growing more animated, more honest, the wine doing its work.
The problem with people today, Damien was saying, his words slightly slurred, is they think hard work is enough. They don't understand that success requires strategic positioning, the right connections, the right presentation. Absolutely, Trevor agreed. I see it all the time. People work themselves to death in middle management wondering why they never break through. They don't understand that success is about who you know, not what you know. And who you marry, Richard added with a laugh. Though I suppose Damien's approach is more efficient. Why pretend it's romance when you can be honest about the transaction? I pushed through the door with the plates, serving each man with mechanical precision. As I set Damien's meal before him, he looked up at me, really looked at me for perhaps the first time all evening. You know, Isabella, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, you should be grateful. Girls like you, from your background, rarely get access to this kind of life. The penthouse, the parties, the private clubs. It's quite an elevation, isn't it? Yes, sir, I replied softly. Very grateful. Sir? Marcus said, his eyebrows rising. Damien, does she call you sir? Old habit, Damien said dismissively. She used to work in hospitality. Some patterns are hard to break. What he didn't know was that I'd never worked in hospitality. The background I'd created for myself was entirely fictional, a carefully constructed identity that would appeal to his ego, his need to feel superior, his desire to be the hero in someone else's story. The real Isabella Silverton had graduated top of her class from Yale, held an MBA from Wharton, and currently sat on the boards of 7 Fortune 500 companies under various proxy names. The real Isabella Silverton had been quietly building power, while men like these thought she was somewhere else, someone else, something less. The background question is interesting though, said another man I hadn't yet catalogued. Peter something, a lawyer. Where did you say you were from, Damien? Before Cambridge? Oh, you know. Damien waved his hand vaguely. Small town, nothing special. Made something of myself, through hard work and determination. I knew exactly where Damien was from. Greenwich, Connecticut, son of a corporate lawyer and a former model. His entire self-made story was as fictional as my own background, though his was motivated by insecurity rather than strategy. And Isabella? Peter asked, turning to look at me directly. Where are you from? Montana, sir. I replied, using the script I'd prepared years ago. Small farming community. Not very interesting. Montana. Peter repeated, studying me with slightly more attention than the others had shown. Long way from here. Yes, sir. Very long. Well, you've certainly landed on your feet, he said, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the dynamic. Another one to watch. I retreated to the kitchen once more, this time pulling up the secure video feeds on my tablet. 7 cameras captured every angle of the dining room in high definition. Every word they spoke was being recorded, backed up to 3 separate encrypted servers. The evidence I was gathering wasn't for anything crude like blackmail. No, this was about something far more elegant. This was about building a complete picture, a comprehensive understanding of who these men really were when they thought no one important was watching. My phone buzzed again. Philippa, your father called, asking about Thanksgiving. I felt a pang of something like guilt. My father, George Silverton, was currently on a yacht somewhere in the Mediterranean, completely unaware that his daughter was playing house with a man who thought she was nobody. My mother had passed away 3 years before I met Damien, and in my grief, I'd made the decision to disappear from high society, to test whether I could find something real in a world where people didn't know my name. Instead, I'd found Damien, and I'd learned that some men didn't need to know you were rich to try to control you. They just needed to think you were powerless. I typed back. Tell him I'll call next week. Still maintaining cover. The dessert was a chocolate torte with gold leaf, because nothing said, I'm compensating for something quite like edible gold. As I prepared the plates, I could hear the conversation shifting to more dangerous territory. The Silverton portfolio, Trevor was saying, and I froze, my hand hovering over the chocolate sauce. Anyone have insight into their recent movements? They've been acquiring commercial real estate across the eastern seaboard, but the ownership structure is opaque as hell. Old money, Richard replied dismissively. They're dinosaurs. Eventually, someone smarter will outmaneuver them and absorb their holdings. I smiled to myself. Let them think that. Let them believe that old money meant old thinking, that tradition equaled weakness. They had no idea that every acquisition they were discussing had been personally approved by me, part of a long-term strategy that would reshape urban development across 6 states. I heard the Silverton daughter disappeared, Peter said, and I forced myself to keep breathing normally. Just vanished from society about 5 years ago. Some kind of breakdown, supposedly. Probably couldn't handle the pressure, Damien said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. That's the problem with inherited wealth. No character development. These trust fund kids crack the moment real adversity hits. If only he knew that the real adversity I'd faced had been sitting across the breakfast table from him every morning for the past 5 years. I brought out the desserts, placing them with the same care I'd shown all evening. As I served Damien, he caught my wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point. "Isabella," he said, looking at me with those blue eyes that I'd once thought were kind, "make sure to save some dessert for yourself. You've earned it tonight." "Thank you, sir," I replied, gently extracting my wrist from his grip. "See," Damien said to his friends. "Perfectly content. Some people are just happier in supporting roles. There's no shame in knowing your place." I returned to the kitchen for the final time that evening, my role as servant nearly complete. But as I cleaned the cooking surfaces and loaded the commercial-grade dishwasher I'd had installed, my mind was already moving to the next phase. Phase 1 had been infiltration. 5 years of carefully constructed identity, of playing a role so thoroughly that Damien never questioned it. Phase 2 had been observation. 3 years of documenting, recording, understanding the full scope of who he was and who he pretended to be. Phase 3 would be revelation, but that was still 2 weeks away. Tonight was the beginning of Phase 4, assembly. I pulled out my secure laptop and began typing, creating a comprehensive dossier on each man in that dining room. Their business practices, their legal vulnerabilities, their hidden scandals. But more than that, I was documenting something less tangible but more damning, their character, or lack thereof. The conversation in the dining room had shifted to cigars and brandy. I could hear them moving toward the balcony, their voices fading as they stepped into the cool evening air of what they thought was Damien's penthouse.
What they didn't know was that the balcony they were standing on was cantilevered from the 37th floor of Silverton Tower, a building named after my family because we'd built it. What they didn't know was that every security camera in the building answered to me, that every employee from the doorman to the building manager knew exactly who I was and why I was there. What they didn't know could fill volumes. I heard the front door opening and closing, the first guests leaving. Through the kitchen window, I watched them depart one by one, each climbing into cars that would take them home to their own lives, their own families, their own versions of reality. Damien was the last to come inside, slightly unsteady on his feet, his expensive suit jacket discarded somewhere. He walked past the kitchen without looking in, heading toward the master bedroom. "Isabella," he called out. "Don't stay up too late cleaning. Some of us have important meetings in the morning." "Yes, sir," I called back. "I'll be done soon." I heard the bedroom door close, heard the shower start. In 20 minutes, he'd be asleep, dead to the world courtesy of the wine and his own arrogance. Only then did I allow myself to drop the mask. I stood up straight, rolling my shoulders back, feeling my spine extend to its full height. I pulled out my phone, my real phone, and made a call. "Philippa," I said, my voice clear and commanding, nothing like the soft whisper I'd been using all evening. "Move up the timeline. We go in 10 days, not 2 weeks. "What changed?" she asked, though I could hear the smile in her voice. She'd been with me since before my mother died, had helped me construct this entire elaborate deception. "I'm tired of being called the help in my own building," I replied, looking around the kitchen that bore my aesthetic choices, my design preferences, my money. "It's time they learned what Isabella Silverton has been doing for the last 5 years. "And Damien?" I thought about my husband, asleep in the bedroom, dreaming his small dreams of importance and status. I thought about the man I'd married, hoping to find something authentic, only to discover that authenticity was the one thing he'd never possessed. "Damien," I said slowly, "is about to discover that the greatest mistake of his life was underestimating someone he thought was powerless." I ended the call and began the final cleaning, my movements mechanical now, my mind racing ahead to everything that needed to happen. 10 days to dismantle 5 years of fiction. 10 days to reveal the truth that would shatter his world. The kitchen gleamed as I finished, everything in its place, everything perfect. Tomorrow morning, I'd make him breakfast before his important meeting, the one with potential investors for his consulting firm, investors he had no idea were actually my proxy companies, ready to withdraw their interest on my signal. But that would be tomorrow. Tonight, I had work to do. I retreated to the guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping for the past 6 months. Damien's choice, not mine, claimed I snored, though we both knew it was about control, about keeping me in my place. The room was small, barely larger than a closet in some standards, but it was perfect for my purposes. Behind the false panel in the closet was my real office, 3 monitors, a secure satellite internet connection, and access to everything I needed to run an empire. I settled into my chair and began pulling up files, documents, recordings. By sunrise, I had compiled a comprehensive presentation. 7 men, 7 sets of files, 7 different flavors of consequences waiting to be served. Trevor Hastings, securities fraud, tax evasion, and manipulation of foreign exchange markets. The SEC would be very interested in his offshore accounts. Richard Blackwell, bribery of city officials, environmental violations, and systematic exploitation of construction workers. I had recordings, receipts, and testimony from 3 people ready to go public. Peter Carmichael, ethics violations, conflicts of interest, and misappropriation of client funds. The Bar Association would have questions. The other 4 were equally vulnerable, their secrets carefully catalogued and weaponized. But Damien was special. For Damien, I had prepared something more elaborate. Something that would strip away every pretense, every lie, every carefully constructed fiction he'd built around himself. I pulled up the final document, the one I'd been crafting for 3 years, adding to it piece by piece, building toward this moment. It was titled simply, The True Cost of Underestimating Isabella Silverton. As the sun began to rise over the city, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I allowed myself a moment of anticipation. 10 days from now, everything would change. 10 days from now, the mask would come off. 10 days from now, they'd all discover that the help had been helping herself to their secrets, their vulnerabilities, their futures. And there wasn't a damn thing they could do to stop it. I closed the laptop and prepared to face another day of playing the role of the grateful wife, the subservient partner, the woman who knew her place. But beneath the performance, Isabella Silverton was sharpening her knives, and the men who'd laughed at me across the dinner table had no idea they'd just attended their last supper. The game was almost over. It was time to reveal who'd been playing whom all along. 10 days moved like a countdown to detonation. Each morning, I served Damien his coffee and watched him leave for meetings he thought mattered. Each evening, I documented another piece of evidence, another recorded conversation, another nail in the carefully constructed coffin. Day 3, Damien announced he'd invited his friends to the annual Silverton Holdings Charity Gala, the biggest social event of the season, held in the ballroom of Silverton Tower. "You'll need to stay home that night," he said over breakfast, not looking up from his phone. "This is a networking event. Important people only." "Of course," I replied softly, pouring his coffee. "I understand." What he didn't understand was that I'd been planning that gala for 6 months. That every detail, from the guest list to the seating arrangements to the precise timing of each speech, had been orchestrated by me through Philippa. Day 7, Trevor Hastings called Damien, panicked about an SEC inquiry. I listened through the baby monitor I'd hidden in Damien's home office as he assured Trevor it was nothing, probably routine. "They can't prove anything," Damien said confidently. "We've been careful. Not careful enough." The SEC inquiry had been triggered by an anonymous tip, from me, with documentation so thorough that Trevor's lawyers were already suggesting settlement. Day 9, the morning before the gala, Damien received his invitation. He showed it to me at breakfast, laughing. "Look at this. They finally invited me to the Silverton Gala. Do you know what this means?" I'm being recognized at the highest levels. I looked at the cream-colored card stock, the embossed lettering, the Silverton family crest. My family crest. That's wonderful, I said. You've worked very hard. You have no idea what an opportunity this is, he continued. The Silverton family will be there. This could change everything for my career. I'm sure it will change everything, I agreed. That night, while Damien slept, I made my final preparations. The gala was tomorrow evening at 7. By 9 o'clock, everyone would know the truth. The day of the gala arrived with crystalline clarity. Damien spent hours getting ready, trying on 3 different tuxedos before settling on the Armani I'd suggested, and paid for, though he didn't know that. You sure you'll be all right here alone? He asked, checking his reflection one more time. I'll be fine, I assured him. I have plenty to keep me busy. He kissed my forehead, the kind of absent gesture you'd give a child or a pet, and left. I waited exactly 5 minutes, then began my own transformation. The dress had been custom-made by the same designer who'd created my mother's gowns for decades. Midnight blue silk that cost more than Damien's car, elegant without being ostentatious. I pinned my hair up the way my mother had taught me, revealing the diamond earrings that had been her mother's. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Gone was the dowdy, hunched figure who'd served dinner 10 days ago. In her place stood Isabella Silverton, heir to a fortune, commander of an empire. Philippa was waiting downstairs with the car, not the modest sedan Damien thought I drove, but the Mercedes S-Class that came with the position. Ready? She asked as I slid into the back seat. I've been ready for 5 years, I replied. The drive to Silverton Tower took 12 minutes. Through the tinted windows, I watched the city I'd helped build pass by. 3 of those skyscrapers bore my family's investments. 2 more were projects I'd personally overseen. We entered through the private entrance, taking the executive elevator directly to the ballroom level. The gala was already in full swing, 300 of the city's most powerful people, all gathered in a room I'd designed with my mother before she died. He's at table 17, Philippa murmured, checking her tablet. With his friends. They've been drinking heavily. Perfect, I said. Drunk men tell the truth. I waited in the wings, watching through a gap in the curtains as the evening progressed. Damien was holding court at his table, laughing loudly, clearly trying to impress everyone within earshot. Trevor, Richard, Peter, and the others were there, all of them comfortable in their borrowed importance. At 8:30, the lights dimmed. The moment had arrived. I walked onto the stage, and the room fell silent. 300 faces turned toward me, recognition dawning in some, confusion in others. Good evening, I said, my voice amplified through the sound system. For those who don't know me, my name is Isabella Silverton. Welcome to my family's annual charity gala. The murmur that went through the crowd was like thunder. I found Damien's table, his face had gone completely white, his mouth hanging open in shock. Tonight, we gather to celebrate philanthropy and community, I continued. But before we begin the evening's festivities, I'd like to share a story about deception, about cruelty, and about the price we pay for underestimating others. I nodded to the tech team. Behind me, the massive screen lit up with a photo, me in my kitchen, taken from one of Damien's social media posts, captioned, "The help, hard at work." 5 years ago, I said, I made a decision to step away from public life. I'd lost my mother, inherited responsibilities I wasn't sure I was ready for, and I wanted to know if someone could love me for who I was, not what I had. Another photo appeared, Damien and me on our wedding day. I looked genuinely happy. He looked triumphant. I met a man who seemed kind, charming, supportive. So I hid my identity and married him, curious to see who he really was when he thought I was nobody. The screen changed to surveillance footage from the dinner party 10 days ago. The audio was crystal clear. "She's just the help, really." Damien's voice filled the ballroom. I watched him sink lower in his chair as his own words condemned him. "Girls like you, from your background, rarely get access to this kind of life. She's more of a domestic arrangement. Some people are just happier in supporting roles." With each quote, the crowd's reaction grew more hostile. These were people who valued respect, who understood power dynamics, who recognized abuse when they saw it. For 5 years, I continued. As the video ended, I played a role. I served meals in my own penthouse. I cleaned my own building. I let him think he'd rescued me, when in truth, every dollar he spent, every opportunity he received, every door that opened for him, it all came from me. I gestured to the room around us. "This tower? My family built it. The penthouse he thinks he purchased through smart investments? I own it through a shell company. The consulting clients who made him seem successful? My proxy companies, feeding him strategies to make him look competent." Damien stood suddenly, knocking over his chair. "This is insane. You're just..." "Just what, Damien?" I asked calmly. "Just the help? Just a domestic arrangement? Just someone who should be grateful?" Security appeared at his elbow, but I held up my hand. "Let him speak. He's had 5 years of telling me what I am. Tonight, I'm returning the favor." I turned back to the crowd. "But this isn't just about my husband. It's about the culture that enabled him. The men who laughed along with his cruelty, who saw nothing wrong with treating another human being as less than." The screen lit up again, this time with documents. "Trevor Hastings, seated at table 17, has been under SEC investigation for securities fraud. The evidence was provided anonymously, by me. Richard Blackwell, same table, has bribed city officials for zoning permits. The recordings were supplied to the district attorney this morning. Peter Carmichael misappropriated client funds. The Bar Association received a comprehensive file 3 days ago." I watched their faces drain of color, one by one. "As for the others at that table," I continued, "each has their own collection of sins, their own carefully hidden scandals. All documented. All reported to the appropriate authorities." Damien found his voice. "You can't do this. This is entrapment or... It's called consequences," I interrupted. "You wanted to know your place in the world, Damien? Let me tell you. You're a mediocre consultant who married someone you thought was powerless, and you spent 5 years proving that cruelty doesn't require money, just opportunity." I pulled out a folder and held it up. "These are divorce papers. On the grounds of irreconcilable differences, emotional abuse, and fraud. You signed a prenuptial agreement 5 years ago, thinking you were protecting your assets. In reality, you were signing away any claim to mine. You'll leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it, nothing." The crowd was completely silent now. Damien looked around desperately, seeking allies, finding none. "The penthouse?" I continued. "Owned by me. The car you drive? Leased by a company I control. The country club membership, the private gym, the vacation home you've been bragging about? All mine. As of tomorrow morning, you'll find yourself with access to none of it." "This is vindictive," he managed. "You're destroying my life over some jokes?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm revealing your life. The one you were living while pretending to be someone you're not. The question is, who will you be now that everyone knows the truth?" I nodded to security. "Please escort Mr. Morrison and his friends out. They're no longer welcome in this building." As they were led away, Damien protesting, Trevor already on the phone with his lawyer, Richard's face red with rage, I turned back to the crowd. Tonight was supposed to be about charity, I said. And in a way, it still is. I'm establishing a new foundation in my mother's name, dedicated to supporting people who've been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. Because I learned something these past 5 years, being invisible gives you perfect visibility into who people really are. The applause started slowly, then built into something powerful. I accepted it with grace, but inside, I felt nothing but exhaustion. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Trevor's assets were frozen pending SEC investigation. He'd eventually settle, losing millions. Richard faced criminal charges for bribery and racketeering. His construction empire crumbled within a month. Peter was disbarred after a disciplinary hearing revealed years of ethical violations. The others faced their own reckonings, lost jobs, broken marriages, reputations destroyed. But Damien was special. He tried fighting the divorce, but the prenup was airtight. He tried going to the press, but the surveillance footage told its own story. He tried claiming I'd manipulated him, but every financial record showed he'd lived far beyond his actual means on my money. In the end, he moved back to Greenwich, to his parents' house, working a mid-level consulting job that paid a fraction of what he'd pretended to earn. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he told people I'd been crazy, vindictive, that I'd destroyed him for no reason. Let him tell that story. The people who mattered knew the truth. As for me, I stepped fully into my role as head of Silverton Holdings. No more hiding, no more pretending, no more masks. I sold the penthouse, Too Many Memories, and bought a brownstone in the historic district. Small enough to feel like home, grand enough to host the business dinners I actually wanted to attend. Philippa became my COO, earning every bit of authority she'd been secretly wielding. And Marcus Wellington, the one guest who'd seemed uncomfortable with Damien's treatment of me? He reached out 3 months later with a sincere apology and a business proposal. We're now partners in a venture capital firm that specifically funds women-led startups. 1 year after the gala, I stood in my new office, looking out over the city. My father had finally returned from his Mediterranean sabbatical, proud of how I'd handled everything, if a bit concerned about my methods. Did you have to be quite so dramatic? He'd asked over dinner. Would you have preferred I stayed quiet? I'd replied. Kept playing the role? Let them keep believing their own superiority? He'd smiled then, that knowing smile my mother used to have. Your mother would have done exactly the same thing. Probably worse. The phone on my desk buzzed. Philippa. There's someone here to see you. Says she's in a situation similar to yours. Wants advice. I thought about that for a moment. About how many people might be living invisible lives, tolerating cruelty, waiting for permission to reclaim their power. Send her in, I said. And clear my afternoon. Because that's the thing about revenge, the sweetest part isn't the destruction of those who wronged you. It's using what you learned to make sure others don't have to endure what you did. I'd spent 5 years being underestimated, dismissed, treated as less than. Those years had taught me patience, strategy, and the true nature of power. Not the performative kind that Damien and his friends practiced, but the quiet kind that reshapes the world while everyone's looking elsewhere. The woman who entered my office was young, nervous, clearly intelligent but trying to hide it. She sat across from me, her posture hunched, her voice soft. I recognized that posture. I'd perfected it myself. Tell me your story, I said gently. And then let's talk about what comes next. Because Isabella Silverton wasn't just the help anymore. She was the one who helped others reclaim what had been taken from them. And that, I'd learned, was the most satisfying revenge of all, not just winning your own war, but ensuring others had the weapons to win theirs. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.